The bracelet hit the floor the exact moment Ella collapsed. There was no scream, no warning, just the dull sound of a fragile body meeting the cold hospital bathroom tiles, and then a faint metallic clink, almost unnoticeable, almost, but not. To the nurse who happened to walk past the hallway, running late for a shift she didn't even want to take. When she opened the door, the scene looked frozen in time. Ella, pale, lying motionless with her eyes closed and her arms spread out as if surrendering the last of her strength. And beside her left hand, an old bracelet, the clasp slightly bent, and inside it, a tiny folded piece of paper, something that shouldn't have been there, something no one expected to find in that moment. The hospital was quiet, the hallways nearly empty. Ella hadn't spoken to anyone for days. She barely answered the doctors anymore, like someone quietly fading, losing color inch by inch. Her mother had stopped coming. No one knew where her father was. Friends, too, had drifted away as they often do when illness lingers too long. But what even Ella didn't know was that the bracelet she wore held something. Something placed there long ago, waiting for the moment of surrender. A message, handwritten, tucked into silver, and meant to be read when all hope seemed gone. If you know someone who's lost their faith, or if you yourself are barely holding on while everything is collapsing inside, write their name in the comments right now. Like this video and subscribe to this channel, because this isn't just a story about pain. It's about the exact moment when hope dares to return, even when no one believes it will. The paper had been folded with the kind of precision that only loving, intentional hands could manage, like someone long ago had known this exact moment would come. The nurse hesitated before opening it, almost as if she sensed that this wasn't just a note, but a calling. As she carefully unfolded the yellowed paper, a delicate, slightly shaky handwriting emerged in faded blue ink. She read it out loud, her voice steady yet reverent, as if she were reading a sacred vow. Truly my soul finds rest in God. My hope comes from Him. Psalm 62:5. The room went still. The nurse stopped adjusting the 4 lines. The monitor's rhythm seemed softer, more rhythmic. No one said a word. And yet, everyone felt something shift in the air. It wasn't just a verse. It was a whisper from heaven. A reminder for anyone who'd ever forgotten how to believe. So now, wherever you are, however you're feeling, I want to invite you to pause for just a moment, breathe, and don't worry if it's been days or years since your last prayer. This isn't a recitation. It's a whisper from tired souls that still long to believe again. Say this with me, quietly, from wherever you are. Lord, teach my soul to wait in silence. When the test results don't change, when the doctors have no more words, when the world keeps moving and I'm paralyzed by pain, teach my soul to trust. Because my hope comes from you, not from instant healing or perfect promises, but from your presence that never left me, even when I stopped noticing. Let my weary heart find shelter in you, and let your timing, even when it feels like silence, be the song that rebuilds my faith. In Jesus' name, amen. If this prayer spoke to you, leave a comment below. Lord, teach my soul to wait for you, and write the name of someone you love who's in need of hope. This comment section isn't just text on a screen, it's a living altar. Let's turn every name into a lit candle. Every comment, a prayer, every like, a silent declaration of faith. The nurse carefully folded the paper again and gently placed it inside the bracelet, which now sat on the nightstand like a relic. She didn't understand how that message had gotten there. She didn't even realize Ella had only just fallen unconscious. But there was something sacred about that room now, quiet, that didn't feel empty, but holy, as if an invisible presence had walked in and simply stood there, watching over her. Ella remained still, her breathing slow but steady, her eyes closed, her face soft and calm. Was it just rest, or was something happening within her that no one could see? There was no answer, not yet, but in that small hospital room, where no one expected a miracle, something had begun. Not with noise, not with spectacle, but with a forgotten word, hidden and revealed right at the moment of surrender. And that word, hope, would never be the same again. The shift between this spiritual moment and Ella's journey didn't happen with flashing lights. It happened like dawn, slow, quiet, undeniable. She would wake soon. But before that, we need to go back just a little, to understand what brought this young woman to the edge of giving up, to see the pain her silence was trying to hide. Because that is where the story truly begins. Ella didn't remember the exact moment her faith began to fade. It didn't vanish all at once. There was no dramatic cry, no moment of rebellion. It happened slowly, like a single strand of hair falling each day, like strength leaking from her body drop by drop as her spirit quietly surrendered. Lupus had that kind of cruelty. It came in waves, unpredictable and unforgiving. One morning she'd wake up with enough strength to shower, and the next she couldn't even lift her toothbrush. The doctor spoke in hopeful tones, throwing numbers and treatment names like life preservers, but they never reached her soul. Because Ella wasn't just sick in her body, her spirit had gone missing. The hospital corridors became her world. Room 418, her home. The routine, a rhythm of slow silence, unbroken by visitors. Her mother, who used to be by her side every day, now came only when she could. Her father had been gone long before the illness showed up, and with him went the last shred of Ella's belief in unconditional love. Friends tried, at first, but people tend to disappear when the healing takes too long, and God, he seemed even further away. At night, Ella would stare at the ceiling and think not, pray, think why, for what, how much longer, but not even an echo came in response. And so, she stopped asking, stopped hoping, stopped expecting. Her Bible, which once sat on the nightstand like a warm hand from her grandmother, became just another object gathering dust. If he had something to say, she told herself, he would have said it by now. That's when a nurse handed her a small envelope. "Someone left this for you," she said. Ella raised an eyebrow, unbothered. But then she saw the handwriting on the front, firm, simple, and unmistakably familiar. It was her grandmother's, Mildred. Her hands trembled slightly. Inside was an old bracelet, silver, worn, with a tiny heart-shaped charm and a slightly rusted clasp. "She wanted you to have this," the note said. Ella slipped it on without thinking, more out of politeness than emotion. It felt cold, empty, just another piece of jewelry from someone who no longer existed. That same afternoon, another patient looked at the bracelet and said, "That reminds me of my mother's. She used to say she had a prayer hidden inside it." Ella gave a faint smile but didn't answer. She didn't talk to people here, not to be rude, just to protect herself. Most people she met in hospitals eventually disappeared. Still, she couldn't help it. The bracelet lingered in her mind. At night, she swore she could feel warmth where it rested on her wrist. Once, she even dreamed of her grandmother whispering, "One day you'll understand why I gave it to you." She woke up with her heart racing but quickly brushed it off. Just a memory, just my subconscious. But the feeling didn't go away. In the days that followed, Ella caught herself staring at the bracelet. Her fingers often traced the clasp, as if she instinctively knew there was more to it. But she never tried to open it, maybe out of fear, or maybe because some part of her still didn't want to hope again. The physical pain grew worse. Her joints burned like fire. Her face was swollen. Fevers came and went like tides. The treatments became more aggressive, the medications stronger. But her mind was sinking deeper into a silent fog that felt like the edge of surrender. That's when she wrote in her notebook, "If nothing changes tomorrow, I'm done." It wasn't a cry for help. It was a quiet pact, a decision made from exhaustion, not weakness. The next morning, during her supervised shower, she looked at herself in the mirror. Her reflection was almost unrecognizable: sunken eyes, cracked lips, pale skin. She touched her face, her shoulders, then looked at the bracelet again. With trembling fingers, she closed the bathroom door, sat slowly on the cold tile floor, and let her body slide down the wall. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just closed her eyes. "I just want to rest," she thought. And as her head leaned to the side, the bracelet slipped from her wrist. It hit the floor with a soft metallic sound, clicked, rolled, opened. Down the hall, a nurse was walking past when she felt something strange. A shiver, a pull. She knocked. No answer. She opened the door and found Ella, collapsed on the floor, breathing shallow but alive. Immediately, she called for help, but something on the floor caught her eye. The bracelet, and next to it, a folded piece of paper. She picked it up carefully. It smelled faintly of old pages, like something forgotten in a drawer for years. She handed it to the head nurse without saying a word. That nurse, without knowing why, held it with reverence, as if her soul already understood before her. Eyes had even read the words. She opened it, and that's when the room changed. Ella didn't collapse all at once. She had been sinking from the inside for weeks. maybe months, until her body simply obeyed what her soul had already decided. Stop. That morning felt no different from the others. The same metallic taste in her mouth, the same constant nausea, the same repetitive beep of machines. But something was different. Not outside, a sense of finality, as if time itself was beginning to close in. She woke up and stared at the ceiling for over an hour, unable to move, uninterested in her phone, untouched by the light filtering through the blinds. When she finally spoke, it was to request a private shower. The nurse hesitated, but Ella insisted, "I just need a moment alone." Her tone was calm, firm, and final. Inside the bathroom, she slipped off her hospital gown and stared at her reflection. What looked back didn't feel like her. Her eyes were hollow, lips cracked, face pale and distant. She ran her fingers along her cheeks, then down to her collarbones. A shiver passed through her. Her gaze dropped to the bracelet. She took a breath, sat on the cold floor, and let her back rest against the tiled wall. Her body slid down slowly. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply exhaled and let go. Her head tilted. Her breathing slowed. The bracelet slid from her wrist. It struck the floor with a soft clink, rolled once, twice, then clicked open. Down the hallway, a nurse was walking briskly when a strange sensation came over her, like a chill or an invisible tug. She paused, knocked. No answer. She opened the door. There was Ella, crumpled gently on the floor, eyes closed, pulse faint. She called for help immediately, but something near Ella's hand caught her attention. The bracelet and a folded slip of paper beside it. She bent down, picked up the paper gently, and handed it to the head nurse. There was no conversation, only silence. The head nurse unfolded it carefully. The ink had faded slightly over time, but the handwriting was still legible. Her voice was soft but clear as she read aloud. "Truly my soul finds rest in God. My hope comes from Him." Psalm 62:5. And then, something shifted. The machines continued to beep. The 4 bags still dripped, but the atmosphere in the room changed entirely. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, but it was real. The air felt heavier, but not with sorrow, with presence. The nurse repeated the verse under her breath, as if trying to memorize it. Then she looked down at Ella's pale hand and gently placed hers over it. "She's still here," she whispered. The doctor entered minutes later. Vitals were low, but stable. "We need to rehydrate and monitor," he said, checking the machines. But before he left, his eyes lingered on the bracelet lying open on the bedside table. "Whose is this?" "It's hers," the nurse replied. "But what matters is what was inside." In the next half hour, they reattached wires, adjusted. The 4 monitored her pulse. She didn't wake, but she didn't deteriorate either. She rested, deeper than she had in weeks. Her face, for the first time in days, was calm, somewhere between sleep and spirit. Something was settling. In the nurse's break room, the head nurse sat quietly with the note in her hands. She refolded it with care, almost ritualistically, and placed it back inside the bracelet. She returned to the room and laid it gently on the nightstand beside Ella. But before leaving, she paused, her fingers grazing the words one last time. "Truly, my soul," she whispered again. She didn't know who wrote it. She didn't know how it had ended up there. But something deep inside her told her this wasn't chance. This was placement. This was timing. This was rescue. Outside, the early morning sun pushed gently through the hospital windows. A soft golden ray spilled into Ella's room, landing across her blanket like a silent promise. No one noticed it. No one pointed it out. But it was there, and somewhere within Ella, something was shifting. Still invisible, still fragile, but undeniably real. Ella woke slowly, like someone rising toward the surface after being underwater for far too long. First came the light, not through her eyes, but through her skin, like a soft warmth resting on her arms. Then came the sounds, the distant rhythm of a monitor, soft footsteps in the hallway, a nurse's quiet voice saying something she couldn't quite make out. When her eyes finally opened, she didn't panic. She didn't rush. She simply looked at the ceiling, breathing deeply, sensing something had changed, something she couldn't explain, but could feel. Turning her head gently, she noticed the bracelet resting on the nightstand. It looked different now, though nothing about it had physically changed. It was still silver, still worn, still hers. But next to it, unfolded with care, was the slip of paper. She reached out, her hands stiff but responsive, Her fingers closed around the note. She lifted it slowly, as if it might fall apart from age or holiness. She read the words, once, twice, a third time. Truly my soul finds rest in God. My hope comes from Him. Psalm 62:5. And then, she cried. But this time, it wasn't the bitter cry of despair. It wasn't frustration or exhaustion or grief. It was release. Like her soul had finally exhaled after holding its breath for too long. Like her heart recognized something it had written a long time ago and had been waiting to remember. She laid her head back on the pillow, still holding the paper. She closed her eyes, not to disappear but to remember. And what surfaced was a dream. In the dream, her grandmother sat on the porch of their old summer home. Same floral dress, same pearl hairpin, Bible open in her lap. You have to learn to wait, sweetheart, she said, voice warm like a blanket. Not everything comes with thunder. Sometimes God heals through silence, and when He does, it means He's working deep. Ella didn't speak in the dream. She simply watched. At the end, her grandmother reached out with the bracelet and whispered, "Now you're ready to understand." She woke with the image still burning in her mind. The rest of the day passed in quiet reflection. She wasn't restless. She wasn't sad. She was simply present. For the first time in months, she wasn't waiting for test results or trying to guess what the doctors might say. She was just there, with the paper beside her, with the verse echoing softly inside her chest. Later, a nurse entered to check her vitals. "You look different today," she said. "Slept well?" Ella nodded with a small smile. She could have explained the dream, the bracelet, the verse, but she didn't. Some things don't need to be explained. They need to be lived. That afternoon, she pulled out a worn notebook and wrote, slowly and carefully, "My soul needs to learn how to wait." She drew a small heart next to the sentence, just like the heart charm on the bracelet. Then she placed her hand over her chest and whispered, "God, if you're still listening, thank you for not giving up on me. Even when I gave up on you, I thought I was alone, but maybe you were just speaking softly. Maybe silence isn't absence. Maybe it's healing." She didn't ask for healing. She didn't demand a miracle. She simply thanked Him for letting her wake up with peace, and that was more than enough. That evening, golden sunlight poured through the window. The trees outside danced gently in the breeze. Car horns and distant city sounds moved through the air like background music. But everything felt softer, brighter, as if the world was no longer pressing in on her, but inviting her back. In that still moment, Ella felt something settle inside, a quiet certainty, not that everything would be okay, not that she was cured, but that something inside her had started to breathe again. And the most surprising part, it didn't come with fireworks, it came with stillness, and that was healing. But there was still one more truth to uncover, something hidden in the folds of that bracelet, something even she didn't know she had written. The next morning, Ella sat upright in her hospital bed, the sunlight brushing her face like a quiet blessing. She was still weak, still sore, but she was here, and something inside her wanted to respond, not to the doctors, not to the disease, but to the silence that had become sacred. She asked for a notebook and a pen, and then she began to write. Each note began the same way. "Truly my soul finds rest in God. My hope comes from Him." Psalm 62:5. Below the verse, she would add a sentence, sometimes a whisper, sometimes a flame. "You are not forgotten. Even when everything feels quiet, God is still speaking. If today isn't the day for a miracle, let it be the day for hope." She wrote 10 notes that first day, then 20, then 30, quietly, faithfully. The nurses knew what to do. They slipped them into patient rooms where the atmosphere felt heavy. They placed them near beds where the pain was louder than the words. They tucked them into folded sheets, next to untouched meal trays, under pillows that cradled exhausted heads. One note reached a woman who hadn't spoken in days. Her daughter read it aloud. "Even when God feels silent, He's still moving." The woman looked at her daughter and smiled, a faint, trembling smile. Her first expression of hope in nearly a week. Word began to spread. No one said where the notes were coming from, but everyone knew. They were Ella's, they were sacred, and they were working. One morning, a grey-bearded chaplain visited Ella's room. He held a note in his hand, eyes moist. "This was left on my tray in the cafeteria," he said. It was the verse, and for some reason, I couldn't throw it away. I carried it in my pocket all day like it was keeping me alive. He sat by her side and added, Do you know what you're doing? These are more than words, they're awakenings. Ella didn't answer. She didn't need to. She simply handed him a blank note. He took it, nodded, and quietly left. Later that day, the chaplain gathered a few patients and families in the chapel room. It wasn't a formal service. It wasn't a sermon. Just a moment of rest. He read the notes aloud, word for word, like poetry, like medicine. Down the hall, in room 423, lay a man in a coma. George. No family, no visitors, no sound, one nurse. Read him a note anyway. She sat by his side, held his hand, and whispered, "Truly, my soul finds rest in God. My hope comes from Him." The monitors beeped steadily until one light flickered. A heartbeat slightly stronger. Not a miracle. Not yet, but a signal. A nudge. She repeated it again. Another flicker. Another breath. Ella heard about it the next day. She closed her eyes and smiled, not in pride, but in reverence. She wrote another note, this time addressed to the one who no longer believes. Inside it, she wrote, "Hope doesn't need proof to be real. It only needs a heartbeat willing to try again." That same afternoon, a nurse brought her a box. "This belonged to your grandmother," she said. Inside were trinkets, photographs, and a brown notebook with a faded cover. Ella recognized it instantly. Her grandmother's prayer journal. She opened it gently, the pages crackling under her fingers. At first it was all verses, notes, names, prayers. Then, halfway through, something stopped her breath. A page, written in a different hand, childlike, uneven, marked with hearts drawn in pink pen. It read, "Truly, my soul finds rest in God. My hope comes from Him." Psalm 62:5. Her eyes widened. It wasn't Mildred's handwriting, it was her own. She had written the verse. Her grandmother had taught it to her as a child. One summer afternoon on the porch, Ella had copied it into the journal, proud of her handwriting. She had forgotten, but Mildred hadn't. She had taken that page, folded it, and tucked it inside the bracelet, saving it for a day Ella would need it most. And that day had come. Tears streamed down Ella's face. "I wrote it," she whispered. "I asked for this. I prayed this into my future." The realization hit her like a wave. God hadn't sent her a new answer. He had sent her back to her own voice, to a memory sealed by faith, to a seed planted by innocence, to a whisper she had spoken before she even knew how much she'd need it. The answer was always inside her. What began as one note turned into 2, then 5, then 10. Without realizing it, Ella had written over 30 messages in a week. Each one held the same verse, the same prayer, the same quiet spark of hope. The nurses knew what to do. They gently placed the notes in rooms where the air felt heavy, by bedsides where pain had made itself a permanent resident, on nightstands beside untouched meals. No one needed to ask who wrote them. Everyone knew. One morning, a man with graying hair and a slow, thoughtful voice entered Ella's room with tears in his eyes. He was the hospital chaplain. In his hand, he held a note he had found in the cafeteria between his utensils. "Someone left this on my tray," he said softly. "When I read it, I cried. Not because of the words themselves, but because of how long it had been since I let them mean something." Ella gave him a quiet smile and didn't say a word. Instead, she handed him a blank slip of paper. He took it carefully, folded it in half, and before leaving, looked her in the eyes. "This verse is lighting candles in rooms that haven't seen sunlight in weeks. God may have chosen you to speak at the very moment you thought you had no voice left." Later that day, the chaplain requested permission from the hospital administration to gather a few patients and families in the chapel. It wasn't a service, it wasn't formal, just a time of rest, a time to read the notes aloud, to let the words fall like rain on dry soil. Ella couldn't attend. Her body still needed rest. But from her room, she heard the echo scripture spoken softly, names whispered with care, sighs shared between strangers who suddenly felt like family. Down the hall in room 423, a man named George had been in a coma for 11 days. He had no visitors, no family, no sound. Still, a nurse sat beside him and read the verse aloud, holding his hand like a lifeline. "Truly, my soul finds rest in God. My hope comes from Him." At first, nothing. Then a slight change in his heart rate. "Subtle, but there," she repeated. It again, a flicker, a second shift, a breath that hadn't been there before. She called for the doctor. Monitors confirmed it. Something had changed. In the hallway, a doctor murmured to a colleague, "It's probably just coincidence," but neither of them said it with certainty. When Ella heard, she didn't react outwardly. She simply closed her eyes, not in pride, but in quiet reverence. Then she reached for another blank slip and began to write again. This one said, "If today isn't the day of your miracle, let it be the day you remember one is still coming." More notes followed. One reached a woman whose mother was dying. The daughter read it aloud, trembling, "Even when it feels like God isn't speaking, He's still writing your healing into the silence." Her mother turned toward her for the first time in days. A tear slipped from the corner of her eye. Her voice came out as a whisper, "Then I'll wait one more day." The chaplain returned to Ella's room that evening. He sat beside her and said quietly, "You're healing more than bodies. You're healing memories. People don't just need medicine. Sometimes they need someone to remember them and speak for them." Ella didn't reply. She just reached for another paper. "If you're reading this," she wrote, "know this. It's not too late. Not for healing, not for hope, not for you." That note would be found a week later by a teenage boy in the oncology waiting room. His grandmother was in critical condition. He wasn't religious, but something about the handwriting, the words, the tone slowed his breathing. He came back the next day, and the day after that. By the third day, he asked the nurse, "Can I meet Ella?" But Ella had already gone home, and that leads us to the final chapter. Ella left the hospital on a clear morning with a calm wind, and a sky so blue it looked freshly painted. There were no balloons, no cheering crowd, just the soft sound of wheelchair wheels turning over tile and a quiet respect from those who watched her go. She wasn't cured, not in the way charts measure. The lupus still lived in her blood. The medications were still needed, but she was whole, not because her body was restored, but because her soul was awake again. Before she left, Ella handed a small notebook to the head nurse. It was light in weight, but heavy with meaning. Inside were more than 50 handwritten notes. At the top of each one, Psalm 62-5. Beneath it, messages of hope, questions that pierced the heart, and simple words that sounded like prayers. On the first page, she wrote a short instruction: "If someone loses faith, give them a page. If they can't pray, read to them quietly. If they want to give up, tell them someone once felt the same. And now, they're choosing to hope again." The nurse held the notebook with both hands. She didn't speak. Her eyes said everything. Ella reached out, squeezed her fingers, and smiled. "Thank you for reading that verse out loud," she said. "You didn't just help save my life. You woke something in me I thought was gone forever." As she crossed the threshold of the hospital's exit, the sunlight touched her face gently. She paused for just a second, breathing in the outside air, as if it were her first taste of life again. For the first time in months, she didn't dread the next day. She didn't fear the unknown. She welcomed it, not because she had control, but because she had peace. In the days that followed, the notebook passed from hand to hand. Nurses used it like a healing guide. The chaplain brought it to family members in the ICU, even the doctors, those who'd long forgotten the language. Her faith began flipping through its pages during quiet moments at night. One night, something unexpected happened. Grace, a nurse on the overnight shift, found a new note folded neatly on the reception desk. She assumed it was from Ella's notebook, but when she opened it, she paused. That handwriting was different. It wasn't Ella's. The note read, "I heard someone reading this verse in the hallway. I thought it was just coincidence, but it stayed with me. So I wrote it in my own words, just in case God was still listening." At the bottom, the verse appeared again. "Truly my soul finds rest in God. My hope comes from Him." Psalm 62-5. Grace smiled. She folded the note gently and whispered, "The current has begun, and nothing can stop it now." A week later, another gathering was held in the chapel. There were no microphones, no grand speeches, just patients and caregivers sitting in a circle, reading notes aloud. Some cried, some prayed, some just sat with their eyes closed, letting the words do what medicine could not. The verse had taken root. It was no longer just Ella's story, it was theirs back in her apartment. Ella sat near the window with a cup of tea and a small stack of letters sent from the hospital. One was from a mother who had received a note during her daughter's surgery. Another from a doctor who said he'd started keeping a copy of Psalm 62-5 in his coat pocket, just in case someone needed more. Then science. But it was the third letter that made her pause. A young woman had written, "I've never met you, but your note found me. You reminded me that even in silence, God still sees, and that was enough to keep me going one more day." Ella read the letter twice, then set it down, and whispered, "Thank you." That night, she wrote in her own journal, "Maybe the greatest miracle isn't healing that looks like magic. Maybe it's hope, passed quietly from soul to soul. Like a note, like a verse, like a light that doesn't scream but never burns out." If this story touched your heart, write in the comments, "Even when God is silent, my soul still waits for him." Leave the name of someone you love who needs healing, or share this video with someone who has forgotten how to hope. Like this message if you believe that God still speaks, even in silence, because sometimes the answer you're looking for was written inside you long, long ago.